Good morning, everybody. The topic today is the creation hypothesis of Advaita Vedanta, Dwaita Vedanta, and science. People have always been curious about questions like this. What is this universe? Who created it? How did it come about? When was it created? When will it end? Why was it created? A famous stanza in Rigveda, composed several thousand years ago, says, "Who really knows? Who in this universe may declare it? Whence was this creation? Who knows whence it arose?" Today, science and religion both wish to answer these questions in their own ways. Their explanations may merge or they may diverge. Advaita Vedanta says that this universe is mithya, unreal, neither real nor false. It says that the universe came from Brahman, but it is a projection, a misunderstanding. In today's language, somebody might say even a simulation of what really is Brahman. Brahman is being misunderstood as this universe. Dwaita Vedanta says, not so fast. This universe is made of matter. And this matter came from Prakriti. This universe, it says, is really the product of Brahman and Prakriti. You might think of Prakriti as primordial matter. Science says something different. Science says that this universe is made of matter, at least around us here, but it came from nothing and is the result of the so-called Big Bang. Three completely different views of what this universe is and where it came from. Now, my curiosity is this. Is there any way that we can reconcile these three differing views of creation? Is there some magical thinking pattern that unifies these three approaches? Maybe there is a small little mathematical equation whose three solutions correspond to these three approaches. How can we achieve a synthesis of philosophy and science? That's what we want to try to attempt to do today. Now, this may get a little involved, but I will stop periodically and review where we are. It will help if you have a piece of paper and pencil with you to take a couple of notes along the way. Now, what approach should we take to this question? I eventually settled upon the approach taken by Euclid in his plane geometry. You remember Euclid's geometry, maybe from middle school or high school. Perhaps some of you remember it very fondly. You got 100 out of 100 in the exam. Maybe others don't remember it so fondly. I'm not going to take us through geometry, but I want you to look at his approach, how he approached that issue. He starts with a series of definitions, and assumptions. We are not supposed to question these definitions and assumptions. For example, he says, a point is defined to be something that has no dimensions. Now, we could easily come back and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. If it has no dimensions, it doesn't even exist. What are we talking about? But we are not supposed to do that. We are supposed to take this assumption as being temporarily correct. And then in this fashion, he makes a series of assumptions. And based upon those, the entire plane geometry unfolds in front of us, one theorem after another, as you may recall. So I want to take a similar approach here. What I'm getting around to is that I'm going to want to make an assumption. And I don't want us to spend a lot of time criticizing that assumption. The assumption that I want to make is, one might call it the God assumption. And what I want to make sure is that we are not going to ask questions like, who created God? And things of this nature. We are going to take this God assumption as, for the moment at least, as correct and see where that leads us. The God assumption is this: God always was, still is, and always will be unchanged. The operative word is unchanged. So this assumption says that in the beginning, there was only God, that is referred to in Hinduism as Brahman. So I'm using the words God and Brahman interchangeably. Now, to say in the beginning is incorrect, because there was no beginning. God has no beginning. Brahman has no beginning. He always was, still is, always will be unchanged. Nothing else existed then. Even nothing did not exist. Something did not exist. All that existed was God. Now, we haven't defined what God is. I could equally well have said that X always was, still is, etc., etc. And I'm very shortly, in fact, going to say that. But in a sense, just for the sake of completeness, Hinduism defines Brahman, and I'm talking about Nirgun Brahman. Hinduism defines Brahman as Satchit Anand. Sat, Chit, and Anand. Three Sanskrit words. What do they actually mean? Sat meaning existence, Chit meaning consciousness, and Anand meaning bliss. So often people say infinite existence, consciousness, and bliss as sort of an English translation. But it doesn't quite completely get it, because Sat is not just existence or infinite existence, but it is what makes existence possible. And there is a difference. Sat is what makes existence possible. Chit is that which makes us conscious or which makes consciousness possible, and so on. In a sense, and I haven't thought this through, but in a sense, it is something like the Higgs boson, which makes mass possible. It is very interesting that Hindu philosophers should propose such profound definitions way back then. So, Brahman, we are equating Brahman at the moment with Satchitanand. We don't need, for this presentation, we don't need an extreme understanding of all of this. It is not an important topic for today. Now, today we see that there is this universe around us. I mean, we know that this universe exists right around us. So the question is, where did it come from? That is the question we are trying to answer. And the obvious answer is, it must have come from Brahman. Where else can it come from? Even if we were to say, looking around, that the universe was made by a devil, then the question would be, where did this devil come from? So however this universe came about, the ultimate source for the universe has got to be Brahman, according to our assumption, because we are saying he was the only thing that always existed. So Brahman obviously is the material cause of this universe, right? In our experience, whenever we make something in a manufacturing process, for instance, we need material, we need a process of manufacture, and hopefully we need some intelligence. So there are three causes, at least three causes, to manufacture anything, to produce anything. In this case, the material cause was supplied by God or Brahman. The process cause must have been supplied by Brahman as well. Because remember, there is nothing else. He didn't have any other help. So the first conclusion is that Brahman is the material cause of this universe. Now, the assumption that we are making, remember we said that Brahman existed without change. And that was important, no change. Means that during the process of creation, Brahman was not used up to any extent. Isn't it? If he got used up even partially, then he would have changed. So this is very unlike any process of creation that we know of. For example, when a potter makes his pots out of clay, let's say he starts with 100 pounds of clay and he uses 10 pounds of clay for making pots. At the end of the day, he ends up with 90 pounds of clay left. What we are saying here is that the amount of clay never changed. That is our God assumption. So we can write this assumption in the form of a mathematical equation. Let us suppose that X is the initial amount of God, whatever that is. Y is the amount of God that was used up during the process of creation. It is like saying that that X for the potter is 100 pounds and Y in the case of the potter is 10 pounds. So how much material was left after creation? X minus Y. X is what we started with, Y is what got used up, X minus Y is what remained. And our God assumption says that X minus Y is equal to X, because X never changed, God never changed. So we have a simple little equation here that says X minus Y is equal to X. Now it is obvious that this equation is completely wrong as far as any practical manufacturing is concerned. Because in practical manufacturing, Y will have some value, would be greater than 0, and X minus Y would never be equal to X. But we are not going to go in that direction. We agreed that we are not questioning our God assumption. And the God assumption, coupled with the fact that this universe exists, leads us immediately to this equation. So let us look at this and ask the question purely mathematically. What are the values of X and Y that satisfy this equation? And it is obvious that if Y is equal to 0, this equation is satisfied, because then the equation would become X equals X, which is true. So one solution to this equation is Y is equal to 0. Now, what does that actually mean? It means that God created this universe without using any of himself. Isn't it? Because Y is the amount of God that was used up in the process of creation. And if Y is 0, he created the universe with no material being used. So that is one solution to this equation, and it is going to turn out that that is exactly what Advaita Vedanta says. So the solution Y equal to 0 will correspond to the Advaita Vedanta answer as to how this universe came about. And we will get into that in a little bit. Now, is there another solution to this equation? X minus Y equal to X. What if Y is greater than 0? Is there any circumstance under which this equation will be satisfied? The answer is yes. The answer is yes, and the equation will be satisfied if X is equal to infinity. Because, as you know well, infinity minus anything is infinity. Infinity minus infinity is undefined, but one of the possible answers is infinity. So infinity minus infinity can also be infinity. So the second solution to this equation is X is equal to infinity. That solution can be made to, and I'm using my words carefully here, that solution can be made to correspond to the Dvaita answer to creation. So one could argue that X equal to 0 corresponds to Advaita, y equal to 0 corresponds to Advaita, and x equal to infinity corresponds to Dvaita philosophy. Now, what about science? Science developed its answers in its own way. I am not suggesting that science looked to Advaita Vedanta or Dvaita Vedanta to come up with the answers, as far as I know. But interestingly, it turns out that science uses the answer that is provided by science, says y is equal to 0, and the universe came from Prakriti. In other words, it uses a bit of both. It uses a bit of both Advaita Vedanta answer and Dwaita Vedanta answer to come up with its answer, which was the universe came from nothing. And it is the result of Big Bang. It is the result of a sequence of transformations of Big Bang. Right? So here we have an equation which kind of gives us three answers, which correspond to Advaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, and science. That is the argument at any rate. Let us see if this argument holds water. So coming to Advaita Vedanta. First of all, what does Advaita mean? It means not two. And exactly what are supposed to be not two? Brahman and this universe are not two. That's what Advaita means. And a famous philosopher on the top cover of his book has said, not two does not mean one. Not two does not mean one, which is a kind of a cute statement at one level, but also very profound. And one could potentially extend that statement to say that not two does not mean one, neither does it mean many, nor does it mean none, thereby wiping out the entire integers, positive integers, and making the topic a little bit more interesting. Because it raises the question, what exactly is this not two? If it is not any other number, what is it? Okay. So, how can Brahman, how can this universe be created out of Brahman without using any of him, any material? Advaita says that there really never was a creation. Creation in the sense of transformation, like making parts out of clay. There never was a creation. All that this universe really is a misunderstanding of Brahman. It is really Brahman, but we think it is this universe. So there was no change of Brahman that actually even occurred. And that is why y is equal to 0. One way to understand this is the famous analogy of the rope and the snake. In the dead of night, we see the rope and we mistake it to be the snake. We are afraid of this snake. But when this misunderstanding is cleared up, the snake disappears, the rope is understood and prevails. That is Advaita. The rope never changed. The rope was the rope. It was simply misunderstood as the snake. And Advaita will eventually go on to say that the purpose of life is to look beyond this universe to the ultimate reality, which is Brahman. But that's a whole different discussion. So how did this universe come about according to Advaita Vedanta? Brahman was never transformed in any fashion. It is just being misunderstood as this universe. Now, why does Brahman project this appearance? Why does the mind project an appearance and create a snake out of a rope? Why does the mind produce a dream universe? The dreamer experiences happiness and sorrow, meets people, travels widely, all in his dream. For him, all these experiences are real while they last. Upon waking up, reality sets in. The reason that the mind projects this appearance is that it is in the inherent nature of mind to do so. So it is the inherent nature of God to project universe. This inexplicable power of projection is called Maya. Maya is to Brahman as heat is to fire. The universe is not real, it is a projection, and Maya is the cause of creation. But this universe seems real to us, and what Advaita Vedanta ends up saying is that this universe is unreal, neither real nor false. And these arguments have been summarized by Adi Shankara in the oft quoted saying, Brahman Satyam Jagat Mithya. So that is Advaita Vedanta. Essentially, so let me stop here for a second and say where we are. We started by making a single assumption, the God assumption, that said God always was, still is, always will be unchanged. That assumption, coupled with the fact that this universe exists, led to an equation that says x minus y is equal to x. There were two solutions to this equation. One solution being y equal to 0, that none of Brahman was used up in the process of creation. That is the solution that Advaita Vedanta proposes, and it essentially says that this universe is an effect. The cause of this universe is Brahman. So this universe came from Brahman in a cause and effect format. But this cause and effect is such that the cause remains unchanged. Just as A rope is mistaken to be a snake, leaving the rope really unchanged. Snake is the effect, rope is the cause, but the effect was produced without a change in the cause. That is Advaita, which corresponds to y equals 0. Now we are going to go on to Dvaita philosophy, which gets a little more involved. So before going there, I want to make some additional assumptions regarding this Brahman. I don't think you will disagree with them, knowing Hinduism, but I want to make 6 assumptions. And this is where I thought it will be good to have a piece of paper. The first assumption is that Brahman is the one and only first cause. Now, this is no surprise. We have already said this in our God assumption, that Brahman is the one and only first cause. The second assumption is that Brahman is homogeneous. In other words, exactly identical all the way through. You see, if that assumption was not true, then the Atman in you and the Atman in me would be different. For all of us to have the same Atman, so to speak, requires Brahman to be exactly identical all over the place, which is this assumption of homogeneity. The third assumption is that Brahman is infinite. The fourth assumption is that the Brahman is everywhere. Now, infinite and everywhere are 2 separate independent assumptions. One does not imply the other. For example, the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, infinity is infinite, but is not everywhere. It doesn't include 1.5. So a sequence could be infinite, but not necessarily everywhere. Similarly, the space in the room I'm sitting in is everywhere in the room, but is not infinite. So assumption 3 is that Brahman is infinite. Assumption 4 is that he is everywhere. Assumption 5 is Brahman is unchanged. And I said that already in the God assumption. So it's not a new assumption. And number 6 is Brahman is indivisible, cannot be cut up into bits and pieces. Indivisible. It's not like a loaf of bread that you can slice up. Now, it is very important. It is almost like a mathematical treatment of the subject. It's very important that we don't make too many assumptions that are all dependent upon each other. Right? So it is very important to see whether these assumptions are independent of each other or not, or we are overstating them. And it seems to me that this assumption, the last one that I stated, indivisible, is superfluous. We don't need it. It is implied. Why is it implied? Well, anything that is infinite and everywhere, what does that mean? It means that Brahman is inside an atom and in interstellar space. There is no place where Brahman is not. And can such an entity be sliced up? When we make a slice, we create some space in between there. So obviously, for something that is infinite and everywhere, there is no way to slice it. So I don't think the fact that he is indivisible is a consequence of assuming him to be infinite and everywhere. Another consequence of infinite and everywhere is that Brahman cannot move, because a better way to state it is that Brahman has no need to move. You move from one place to another. You move from a place that you are at to a place that you are not at. That's movement. Brahman already occupies all places. He has no need to move. He is already there, right? So these are all consequences of making these assumptions. So for our purposes, we can, in a sense, scratch out the last assumption that says indivisible, because it is a consequence of previous assumptions. Okay, so I'm making these 5 assumptions regarding Brahman, and now we are ready to move on to Dvaita philosophy. Dvaita philosophy says that this universe came from Prakriti. You can think of Prakriti as matter, primordial matter, the original matter, if you like. It goes on to say, Sankhya philosophy goes on to say, for example, that Prakriti is made of 3 gunas, 3 qualities, 3 gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Like a rope made of 3 strands. The philosophy goes on to say everything under the sun and beyond is a real transformation of this Prakriti, like transformations of matter. So it is not saying that this universe is unreal. It's not saying that this is fake news. It is saying that this universe is made of matter and is a transformation of Prakriti. And this transformation continues. It is saying all of that, which is a different statement than made by Advaita Vedanta in terms of what this universe actually is. So the interesting question is, where did this Prakriti come from? And this is where issues start coming up. So let's think about this. What are the possibilities? One possibility is that there was Brahman, and for whatever reasons, he transformed all of himself into Prakriti. If we assume that, then we would have to say that Brahman is gone. Brahman no longer exists. This universe is all that we really have got. Now, that may well be the atheist position. Maybe Spinoza has that idea, that kind of an idea. Perhaps Charvak philosophy might be saying something like that. I have not studied all of these in detail. But I don't want to consider that possibility any further. So where else can Prakriti come from? the Dvaita philosophy ends up saying that Prakriti coexists with Brahman. In other words, as a separate reality. In other words, the idea that Brahman is the first cause, one and only, right? Ekam cha advitiyam, one without anything else. That assumption is completely violated. In the 5 or 6 assumptions that we made, the very first assumption was Brahman is one and only first cause. If I were to say that Prakriti coexisted with Brahman as an independent reality, and this universe came from Prakriti, then this first cause assumption is completely violated, no longer true. There are 2 first causes in this case. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm simply pointing out that the definition of Brahman has been dramatically altered by the Dvaita philosophy. The Brahman of Advaita and the Brahman of Dvaita are 2 different things. There is a parallel to this in geometry. For example, in plane geometry, we say that the distance between 2 points, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That is true for plane geometry. But that is not true on the surface of this earth. Because earth is not a plane, it is a sphere. So the distance between Minneapolis and Beijing is not a straight line. That straight line would go through the middle of this earth. It is the geodesic distance, curved. So the basic assumption of plane geometry gets changed when we go to spherical geometry. In a similar fashion, as we are going from Advaita Vedanta to Dwaita Vedanta, it seems to me that the definition of Brahman has been altered, has been changed by creating this Prakriti which coexists with Brahman. That's one form of Dvaita philosophy. Another form of philosophy says that Prakriti is a structural part of Brahman. It's kind of, in a sense, embedded in Brahman. Like for human beings, we have, supposedly have Atman and also have our body. And one thing is embedded in another. Is that form of Brahman. That this Prakriti, which is primordial matter, is now a part of Brahman. If you do that, and if we look back on these assumptions that we listed, how many of those assumptions are violated? Well, Brahman is no longer homogeneous if it includes Prakriti as a part of it, right? Prakriti is changing. Prakriti is what created the universe. So if Prakriti is considered to be a part of Brahman, then perhaps one would have to say that the Brahman has changed, etc. So as we go from Advaita Vedanta to Dvaita Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta proposes that this universe is made from Prakriti. And as we try to understand where this Prakriti comes from, we end up potentially substantially changing what we mean by Brahman. And an interesting question there is, which I'm not going to get into except to pose it. An interesting question is that we have these various paths, right? There is the Jnana Marga, right? There is Bhakti Marga, etc. Advaita philosophy is, in my opinion, better suited for Jnana Marga, knowledge, the path of knowledge. Dvaita philosophy is better suited for Bhakti Marga. But, and we always say that all these paths lead us ultimately to the same location, so to speak. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest and taking different paths to go to the peak. That is all true if the peak is defined in the same way. Namely, if Brahman is defined identically. But if Brahman is defined one way in Advaita and another way in Dvaita, it's not clear that we are reaching the same goal by following these different paths that are there. So the question that came up in my mind was, is there a way that we can create Prakriti without changing the definition of Brahman? While allowing Brahman to satisfy those 6 assumptions that we wrote down, that he is one and only first cause, and homogeneous and infinite, and so on and so forth. So let us suppose that we think in this fashion. That a portion of that Prakriti, let's think like this. Prakriti is a continuous or periodic actual transformation of a portion of Brahman. Think about that. Let's think about that for a second. It's almost like there is Brahman, a portion of him is being transformed into Prakriti, into matter. Now, what will happen? Which assumptions are getting violated? The first assumption was Brahman is the one and only first cause. We have not changed that. The second was Brahman is homogeneous. We haven't changed that. The third was Brahman is infinite. We have not changed that. Fourth was Brahman is everywhere. We haven't changed that. Now comes the questionable ones. The fifth assumption was Brahman is unchanged. Here we have this Brahman, supposedly, that is being changed into Prakriti. A portion of it is getting used up. A portion is getting used up. Doesn't that mean that Brahman is changing? That Brahman has changed? Well, not quite. Because if Brahman is infinite, infinite minus anything continues to be infinite. Infinity is a very interesting thing. If you take something away from it, it continues to be the same. So despite the fact that Brahman is changing, supposedly, into Prakriti, and is creating Prakriti, it doesn't mean that Brahman has changed. It is still the infinite Brahman. How can we visualize this? Is there a way that we can visualize this? So I turned to something called Hilbert's Hotel. Hilbert's Hotel has infinite number of rooms in it. All those rooms are filled up with guests. Every room is occupied. A new guest comes in looking for a room. Now, if this were a real hotel that we are familiar with, and if every room was occupied, this new guest is not going to find a room there. But Hilbert's Hotel has infinite rooms. Every one of them is occupied. That is true. But the hotel management does this. They move the guest in room 1 into room 2, the guest in room 2 into room 3, and so on and so forth. Every guest that was there is now still has been accommodated. And room 1 has become empty for the new guest that has just arrived. That is the power of infinity. Right? And in terms of creating Prakriti, it is the reverse of this situation. It's almost like room 1 is being converted, is being emptied instead of a new guest arriving. So it seems to me, we can discuss this further, but it seems to me that there is a way of presenting the creation of Prakriti in a way that the basic assumptions of Advaita, Brahman, are not violated. So, and that depends upon the second solution to that equation, x minus y equal to x. The second solution was x equal to infinity, and that is what we are banking on. Let's relatively quickly go to science and see what science is saying about creation, and if that fits into our general thinking pattern. The current, as I understand, the current scientific thinking, it seems to suggest that this universe originated from nothing and involves a continuous transformation of matter. Now, as I understand it, Einstein's general theory of relativity predicted an expanding universe. This expanding universe prediction was experimentally confirmed by the observation that galaxies are rapidly moving away from each other. So the mental picture one might have is this. Imagine a balloon where we have inked in a few dark spots on the balloon. And now this balloon is being blown up. The dark spots represent galaxies. And as the balloon is being blown up, what will happen is that all these galaxies will be running away from each other in this expanding universe. That's kind of the picture. And if this universe is expanding, if the galaxies are running away from each other, then if you take this expansion backwards in time, the conclusion is that they must have started from some point source some time ago. They must have converged to a point some time back. And the current estimates are that this happened 13.8 billion years ago. So in a sense, all of this was collected together, so to speak, 13.8 billion years ago, and then happened Big Bang. Now, the words Big Bang, they are kind of neat, but they conjure up a feeling that there was some kind of a humongous explosion of matter. And that isn't quite it. Big Bang was an expansion of space in the creation of this universe. So let's think about this a little bit. This universe consists of a large amount of matter, such as our solar system, galaxies, and so on. And now we also know that it has dark matter, dark energy, which we don't know too much about, perhaps scientifically. But all of this adds up to a very large amount of energy, very large amount of energy. We also have gravity. And the gravity has negative energy. Maybe we can get into this later, but gravity has negative energy. So there is the positive energy of matter and the negative energy of gravity. And the best estimates are that the total energy of the universe is zero. What does that mean? That means that to produce this universe doesn't take any energy. This universe came from zero energy state. Is the ultimate free lunch. So in this sense, the scientific explanation corresponds to y equal to zero solution. It came from nothing. Now, that is not exactly what Advaita Vedanta is saying. Advaita Vedanta is not saying that this universe came from nothing. Remember, because nothing didn't even exist according to Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta is saying that y is equal to zero because it is a misunderstanding of Brahman, not because Brahman created this universe out of nothing. Science is saying that this universe came from nothing. Right? But science is also saying that this universe is made of matter. And it came from some sort of a primordial matter, if we could interpret it that way. It is kind of like saying that it came from some original fundamental particles, whatever you want to call them, like Prakriti. Different definition of what Prakriti might mean, but it is conceptually similar. So in this sense, science uses both the y equals zero and hypothesis of Advaita and the Prakriti hypothesis of Dvaita. Does science say anything about God? What is God for science? Maybe God does not exist according to science, but one way or the other, there are laws of physics. Perhaps the laws of physics also originated with the Big Bang. Space originated with Big Bang. time originated with Big Bang. What about laws of physics? If one could argue that laws of physics have always existed, then that would be the equivalent of God as far as science is concerned. So I'm going to stop here. Let me just summarize. Our purpose today was to look at the explanations or assumptions that Advaita philosophy, Dwaita philosophy, and science make regarding what this universe is and where it came from. Advaita says this universe came from Brahman and is in fact a misunderstanding of Brahman. Dwaita says this universe came from Prakriti, is the result of Brahman and Prakriti, and is actually made of matter. Science says this universe came from nothing as a result of Big Bang. And we tried to see if there is a way of unifying, or at least thinking about these three disparate thinking patterns and unifying them in some way. And in doing so, we started with the God hypothesis, that God always was, still is, always will be unchanged. That hypothesis and the fact that this universe exists immediately gave us a simple little equation that says x minus y is equal to x. This equation has two solutions, y equal to 0 and x equal to infinity. The y equal to 0 solution leads us to Advaita Vedanta. The x equal to infinity solution could potentially lead us to Dvaita Vedanta. And a combination of y equal to 0, 0 energy, and x equal to infinity, Prakriti, is where science seems to be, as I understand it. So let me stop here, and hopefully there is time for discussions and so on.
Not knowing anything from anything, what I wonder, your science solution that universe came from 0 energy, right? Because there's positive energy and there's negative energy. But that seems to me, Anand, that is also an assumption. So let's say there was nothing, and this pen comes about, and this has a positive energy, and this another pen comes about that has negative energy, right? So it's my simple or simplistic, I should say, way of thinking that is somewhat problematic for me. And also, why did it happen 13.8 billion years ago? Why not 13.7 or 13.9 billion years ago? So these are the questions that, in a way, are unanswerable. That's my thought. That there are so many things that we don't know, and we can make all the assumptions. It's good to think about it than not even think about it. But so people would say that we are living in a multiverse. This is not all we have, right? And some people would say the universe is not maybe expanding, but sometime it may contract and may collapse. And so big bang and a big crunch, okay, and then another big bang. That's what Hinduism says, right? Time is cyclical. So anyway, I'll stop, Anand. This is all I have to say.
Well, yeah, I think I don't know that there is any question about some of these answers today. Maybe what you're saying might have been the case 5,000 years ago, but science has exponentially changed, as you know so well yourself. And the answers, there is still some uncertainty, definitely, whether it was 13.8 or 13.7, etc. Those numbers have been continually zeroed in on. The idea that there is that things add up to zero energy comes from simply the conservation of energy principle. As potential energy changes to kinetic energy, as you know so well, the sum of the two remains the same. And in order for that to happen, one of the energies is considered negative. Otherwise, you will be adding two positive things all the time, and so on. So one good way, though, your question brings up is that it might be interesting. I know this is discourses on Hinduism, but it might be interesting to invite some other folks, such as professors of physics and so on, to tell us what the latest theories are regarding the beginning of the universe. Obviously, it's not completely understood, but understood well enough and being substantiated by experimental data. Is not just talk. It is being substantiated by experimental data. And predictions are being made that have been proved many years later that have come true. So there is a lot of backing that goes into that science, as I'm sure you're very well aware of.
Namaste, Anandji. I enjoyed the discussion very much. It helped explain a lot about, especially the difference between Advaita and Dwaita philosophy. But one thing I was wondering, you said science says that it came from nothing, and I'm wondering if that assumption is correct, because you pointed out things like dark matter, which we don't fully understand. We can't see it, of course. And it reminds me of like infrared light, where at one point, they thought that only what they saw was there. And then they realized that there are other things on the spectrum that we can't see. And so I'm wondering that even if you went to one convergence point the billion years ago, before the Big Bang, perhaps everything might have been in the form of this dark matter, and whatever we call God, it might be, the equivalent of this dark matter and so on. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it says that things came from nothing. To me, I think it's possible that science is very much in conformance with a lot of these theories too. But I just wanted to make another comment though. There's a book I was reading called Proof of Heaven, and it's a near-death experience book, but it's written from the perspective of a neurosurgeon. And that's why I thought it was very interesting, because a neurosurgeon will have a very scientific perspective on the afterlife and that type of thing. And one of the things he said in the book, when he came back into his body, and he was again limited by having two eyes and these senses that we think are so great, but having experienced the afterlife, he realized that it was such a step down to come to see through your two eyes, and it was so limited, and he can no longer see everything the way he was in the afterlife. So the reason I'm saying that is that it makes me think that perhaps our perceptions that we're trying to understand these deeper philosophies and the origins are so limited with the tools that we have with our existing body that it will just make it very futile. That's just my comment.
Yeah, yes, I mean, science would be the first to admit that it doesn't know everything. In fact, not only that it does not know everything, it will never know everything. Right? Because we know statistically, for example, that you can never prove anything. All that we are doing is we are not able to disprove something. That's all. We can never prove anything. Science knows that, right? It is only, I mean, we know that everything that science is saying is wrong. That's known. But on the other hand, it is right to sufficient degree for us to be using it, right? And the mere fact that science does not know it does not necessarily mean that anybody else knows it. So to simply take the ignorance of science and then create some sort of a mental picture all by yourself out of that ignorance is close to being stupid, right? So I think we need to accept, as scientists, we are accepting the fact that we don't know everything.
Yes.
And perhaps what somebody else is saying could well be the truth. That's a possibility. But we don't know that. If we truly believed that, then science would have gone in that direction. And as far as this dark matter and all that, yes, my understanding is that it is not understood as to what it is. But that doesn't mean that its total amount has not been figured out. So when they talk about energy and the energy of matter and dark matter as positive energy, and the energy of gravitation as negative energy, and that adding up to something close to zero, my understanding is that that is reasonably correct. But that is why I made the proposition early on that the right person to get to would be an astrophysicist, which I am not. So, they would be better able to explain uh, exactly why, first of all, is this true or not, exactly why it is true, and most importantly, what does nothing actually mean? What nothing means is itself a very interesting subject. Right? When we say nothing, we feel like it's some kind of a vacuum and there is nothing in it. That isn't exactly true.
Yes.
Right? So there is a lot there that unfortunately I am not in a position to answer very well.
First of all, I approach a subject like this from a viewpoint that Narendra Ned Mohan had taught me. In this infinite world, solar system is a speck, and in that Earth is a speck, and we are even minuscule specks. And I look at this and say, wonder how much we have been able to hypothesize or theorize. So that itself is a wonder to me. And, this is the first time, Anand, your approach to mathematical, very simplified approach to the three paths, that was just wonderful. I like that. Maybe knowledgeable a little bit about mathematics, I could understand this better than when I read a book on these subjects. But my comment is that it seems like there's three almost like parallel paths which are all trying to get to one answer maybe, or different answers. You have any comment on that?
I think, they're all answering the human curiosity. We realize that we are a small speck in this universe. We understand that. But we are curious people, right? We want to know. Curiosity must have been very important in evolutionary biology. But so we are curious. And to the extent possible, we try to figure out how things might have come about and whether this makes sense and that makes sense and so on, knowing full well that whatever it is that we are thinking of today is likely to be wrong. Nobody is saying that it is the ultimate truth. I don't think we know that. I mean, all that we know is that whatever we say is likely to be wrong.
Yeah, we say Hinduism is an inquiry, not a destination.
Right.
That's what Hindu philosophy is. It's an inquiry.
First of all, I want to thank you. This was very illuminating. One of the things you didn't get into, and I understand that wasn't part of your discussion, is the idea of how life came to be once the universe was formed. And I think in that sense, the Hindu philosophy has some very interesting models on how Brahma split into the form of a Manu and so on. To me, that's a very interesting kind of way of propagation of the universe. I want to now switch to the other side. I'm a physicist, although retired a long time ago. So I used to teach astrophysics, but unfortunately, it's like 20 years ago. So I'm not completely aware of the latest permutations and explorations. But to the extent that I'm familiar with, first of all, idea of vacuum is actually not something that has zero energy. In fact, you could have lots of energy and be in a state of vacuum. So, the cause is already there in nothing to make things happen. Ultimately, it's the energy that's a driver of any sort of process. The other part of it is that, as physicists, we always look for a way in which we can explain something that fits into our models in a consistent way. So we are always looking for explaining something like, for example, the Big Bang and how it came about and the expansion, and of course, whether this expansion will continue or not. And there are these models where, as maybe there'll be a crunch. So then thinking about the mechanisms, black hole provides a very nice mechanism. So in fact, one of the prevalent models in the ways of thinking about the universe is that our universe is just a temporary state, and that we are part of a whole evolution of universes. And they come and go based on the Big Bang and the Big Crunch. And now we have theories in which how we can transit from one to the other. The wormhole, for example,
Yes.
you may be familiar with the idea. And that's how matter and energy could move from one universe to another. And we have no way of finding any information. We haven't figured out a way to communicate with that. So our communications are restricted. So as such, there is a huge unknown. And in that sense, our language may be precise in terms of the mathematical modeling and the consistency, but as far as understanding and feeling what it is, we are still quite lost. And so to that extent, I think a lot of the, this is sort of a perennial philosophies that keep moving on. And they express themselves in different languages and different models and different modes. And it's a great adventure to be living. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
I had two things that came to mind. One is that from what you said, I kind of personally like the so-called infinite universe hypothesis.
Mhm.
And quite simply, the reason is that people always ask, how did all these things happen? How are there human beings here? And so on. There must be some sort of a designer that did it. Somebody must have some kind of a programmed, thoughtful thinking that led to the creation of this universe and creation of people on it and so on. I've always personally found that to be not an acceptable hypothesis. So when we have this idea of infinite universes, that universe is getting created all the time, then it is obvious that one of those infinite universes will turn out to be what this universe is, just randomly, which is to me far more satisfying than imagining a God that purposefully created this universe. But that is just me. That's my thinking pattern. That doesn't mean that somebody else cannot believe in some other approach to it. So, and that was partly why I was interested in that Dvaita philosophy, in suggesting that Prakriti could be created continuously out of Brahman as long as Brahman is infinite. Because that to me means the possibility of infinite universe hypothesis. The second thought that came to me was that we could take the attitude that science and religion are two separate things, nothing to do with each other. Religion has its own sphere of activity, and science operates in its own independent sphere of activity. Their approaches are different, and so on and so forth. That's one way of thinking. I was hoping that we could move to some, I'm not saying a love marriage, if not a love marriage, maybe an arranged marriage. And if not that, at least a handshake between science and religion. So, for example, my attitude was that how to make the gun is a question of science and engineering. I am not asking Advaita Vedanta as to how to design and manufacture a gun. But when to use it potentially is a question of morality and so on, which was the idea behind religion to a fair degree. Now, if we could bring these two parties together, when to use the gun and how to design it, if we were to bring these two parties together, it is possible perhaps to design a gun that can only be morally used. Right? Something of that type is what I meant by looking at these philosophies and also science with the hope of trying to put them together in a certain fashion. That's what I was, those were the two thoughts that came to me. But I think I'm saying for the third time that it'll be, if we are interested in these topics, the right person should be the one speaking on, perhaps it is yourself, sir, on the astrophysics involved in creating the universe.
Well, Anand, enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you for presentation this morning. And it has been fun discussing with you off the line for our last several days, if not several months. Couple of things. We still believe that Shankara's Maya interpretation fits the most, the Vivarta we call it, because it fits in all the 6 factors that you neatly outlined. It answers all of them. And if we do use your technique to use Prakriti, then what you'll have to do, the number 6 that you mentioned, indivisible, I would change it, and in the bracket here, cannot be broken up into parts. What I would say is cannot be broken up and separated in different parts. That means what, when you're trying to create a cubic cubes, you're breaking into smaller pieces, but they don't move out of the entire system. So if you do that mathematically, then you can make changing from one place to another, it'll fit in really, really nicely. And I think with all said and done, I don't want to bore everybody, as stated various things brilliantly. I think your mathematical equation this morning is more close to Advaita than Dwaita. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
I don't have a question, but I have enormous appreciation. I think this has been a truly profound attempt at synthesis, maybe the most profound single attempt that I have ever encountered. And I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you very much.